Many know that we have two brain hemispheres, but what few realize is that the hemispheres are weakly coupled, and that entails that they cannot remain fully in tune even if they want to. This leads to two weakly coupled minds that, as it seems, provide complementary outlooks on the world.
And I base myself on an absolutely magnificent book by Ian McGilchrist, The Master and His Emissary. Ian McGilchrist is, he studied pretty much every field you can think of within medicine and the humanities. And he is able to integrate across all kinds of different fields of science, like I also try to do. And he made a book about how our divided brain shaped the course of historical development and how it actually made the key structures of our Western world. And the topic of hemispheric differences, so differences between the left and the right hemisphere, that has gotten out of fashion. Because we were originally only thinking that one half of the brain would do one thing and another half of the brain would do another thing. But it's not the functions that matter. What matters is how the both sides of the brain make sense of the world and how they relate to the world. And they do that in a complementary way. So they are always involved in everything, but sometimes one offers a better solution and sometimes the other offers a better solution. So the right hemisphere is the master, and it presents what exists, so it is in tune with the rest of the world. And the left hemisphere is the emissary, the servant, who solves problems, whatever is necessary, and he does that in a world of its own that is based on the presented world, but it is now a presented world, only a small part of that world, a closed small part of that world, and it's using that world for all kinds of purposes. So it represents the world's utility. Connected to the brain, it looks a bit like this. We have two half brains. They are weakly coupled, and they are kind of connected via the lower levels, say the brainstem and the limbic system. And the brainstem might decide on which part of the brain actually has the best solution at any point in time. Yeah, so they are not doing the same, but they are coming up with complementary and sometimes contradictory solutions. And but we have to make a decision, and we switch between the proposals of the left and the right hemisphere. That is kind of the idea. And how do they do that? Well, they have a function associated with structure and openness, with the tessellation of Escher. So we have a left hemisphere that is for cognition, for control, for order, for certainty, for utility. And we have a right cortical hemisphere that is for exploration, disorder, possibility, and engagement with the world. And that allows us to deal with both sides. And McGilchrist visualizes that in a different way. So he turns, by the way, the picture around, so left is now right, etc., because this is how we look at the brain of someone else. But on this side we have cognition for control, order, certainty, and utility. And this is the closed world cognition. So it's static, it's isolated, it's fixed, it's general in nature, it's decontextualized, it's abstracted, but very clear. And so this is, and eventually lifeless. So this is typically closed world cognition. This is open world cognition. This is one big mess of all kinds of social and other influences going together and influencing everything in the context of everything else and making sense of that. And he describes it as that the right hemisphere, by contrast, yields a world of individual, changing, evolving, interconnected, implicit, incarnate, living beings in the context of the lived world. A closed system can be perfect because it is a closed and finite system, but it comes at the cost of emptiness. Its disconnectedness from the rest of the world leads to an empty perfection that does justice to the rest of the whole and the whole beauty of the whole. But it's very, very useful in many cases. In this paper, we summarized the differences that McGilchrist described for the left and the right hemisphere, and we did it in table 1 of this paper. And I will now go through the table. It's a little bit boring in some sense, but it's super interesting information. So let's go to the first page. In the first page, we have here the top, it's always the same, left hemisphere with cognition for control, order, certainty, utility. Right hemisphere, cognition for exploration, disorder, possibility, and engagement. And this is all kinds of different issues. So the main concern of the left is utility, and of the right is what actually is. The scope of the left is short and local, and of the right is broader and long-term. The left is interested in what is familiar and known, and what it knows, and man-made objects, so other closed things. And the right hemisphere is interested in novel, in what it experiences, in new information, new skills, engagement with other living individuals. So absolute opposites in interest, and we need both. Another page here, the strength of the left is typically that it's efficient in routine situations with familiar skills, and it generates expectations. Yes, the whole purpose. It makes the world more predictable and more usable. The right hemisphere is, on the other hand, good when prediction is difficult, when it's a big mess, when there are many options and no clear structure, and it's for that reason more efficient when initial assumptions need to be revised or when old information needs to be distinguished from new information. So, attention type, no, local, narrow, selective, broad, global, and flexible. Construction of the world, well, the left hemisphere starts by pieces bottom up, and the right hemisphere starts from the whole, the whole of experience, and then go into detail if necessary. Another page, how objects are represented. The left represents categories of things, while the right presents or represents in unique instances of things. So this is interested in girls versus boys, and this is interested in individuals, uniqueness, individuality. The problem-solving limitations, this is typically a single solution and latch onto that. Guys, we have a problem, let's solve it now. It denies inconsistencies. So the sister in the bureaucracy has no place in the form, so therefore it doesn't work. And it suppresses not currently relevant relations. Why? Because it created its own little world. On the right hemisphere, it's always open, and it's always open to alternatives, and always watching for discrepancies. So everything that is not fitting in the nice left model of the world is something that is where the right hemisphere is sensitive to. Preferred knowledge type, well, typically public knowledge. Everything that can be transmitted via language is something for the left hemisphere, while the right hemisphere is everything that you can learn from personal interaction with the world. Completely different type of knowledge. This is much more tacit knowledge, this is explicit knowledge. Then reasoning. Well, the left hemisphere is linear sequential reasoning, and concentrating helps to focus on the explicit structure of the problem. But the right hemisphere does it differently. So sometimes you need not to concentrate. So typically when you get your best ideas when you're under the shower or on a bike or something like that, that is the right hemisphere, allowing then you to bring a good idea into the focus of attention. And it typically works by aha phenomenon, which is that all of a sudden, whoop, things make more sense. So they connect together, they form a nice consistent pattern. And that is not the linear step, that is a whole complex pattern thing going from one state in another. And the more you concentrate, the less the right hemisphere actually works. Well, language use, The left hemisphere is very good in symbol manipulation, but also not very good in deep meaning. The right hemisphere goes for deep meaning. It understands sarcasm and the different intonations and feelings in language much better. It's also for poetry. Last page here, the emotions associated with the left hemisphere are with competition, with rivalry, with individual self-belief, while the emotions of the right hemisphere are all emotions and emotions related to bonding and empathy. Typically, a last thing is that the left hemisphere, because it is not really concerned with individuals and it is concerned with a solution and getting a solution, whatever that means, it is unconcerned with others and their feelings, while the right hemisphere, having the luxury of not being for problematic situations, can have empathetic identification, more self-awareness, empathy, identification with others, and theory of mind of others. Yeah, so there is a completely different world, two different worlds in our brain, in the two halves of our brain. And the two halves, they offer benefits. And they offer benefits not only to each of us, but they also offer benefits to society. And so if you become proficient in seeing the effects of the different modes in society, you learn a lot about society, and you can say something about what types of behaviors or developments in society are governed by the left mindset or the right mindset. Yeah, so that is an important thing. But the main thing is that the organization of the brain reflects the requirements of agency and life. Yeah, so our brain is the way it is because life demands it to be. It has two different ways of interacting with the different ways of interacting with the world, and that is the reason why our brain is reflecting its current structures and functions and outlooks.